In one of the strangest cocaine smuggling operations ever uncovered in Europe, authorities seized more than 2 tons of cocaine hidden inside a shipment of cowhides. The shipment arrived looking like completely ordinary commercial cargo. But behind that cargo was a massive international trafficking operation that ended with 19 arrests and the seizure of approximately 2.2 tons of cocaine. But how were the traffickers able to conceal such a massive quantity of cocaine inside a legitimate shipment? And why did they choose cowhides in the first place? More importantly, what made investigators suspect that this shipment was hiding something else? Because finding the cocaine wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of an investigation that uncovered a network far larger than authorities initially expected. So how did the shipment make its way into Europe? How did investigators discover what was hidden inside? And who was really behind the operation? This is the story of the cowhide shipment that was hiding more than 2 tons of cocaine. After the shipment arrived in Portugal, it was extremely difficult for anyone looking at it from the outside to know that there was something illegal inside. The containers were part of normal commercial traffic, and the declared product was cowhides imported through Portuguese companies. But behind this apparently legitimate trade was a massive quantity of cocaine coming from Latin America to Europe. And what was even stranger was that the authorities were not dealing with the traditional smuggling method. According to Europol, the cocaine was hidden inside shipments of cowhides using a new concealment method, and this method was so sophisticated that it made the drugs extremely difficult to detect at ports. It even managed to evade detection by port scanning equipment and dogs trained to detect drugs. And here we need to understand something important. The fact that the shipment was not detected at the first stage does not mean that authorities did not inspect it. The problem is that port operations deal with a massive volume of goods and containers. So when there is a genuine commercial shipment containing a real product, the inspection process becomes more complicated when the drugs are integrated into the cargo itself, rather than being present as something separate and obvious. According to Europol, it was not possible to reach the cocaine simply by looking at the shipment from the outside, and the only way to determine where the drugs were located was to completely dismantle the shipment. And this is where the moment that changed everything begins. Investigators were no longer looking at the container as merely a container of hides. Every piece of the shipment had become part of a criminal investigation. The question was no longer, where are the bags of cocaine? The question became, is there something hidden inside the cargo itself? And as the shipment was dismantled, the truth began to emerge. The cocaine was inside the cowhides. And this was the moment that revealed that authorities were not dealing with a small shipment or an isolated operation, but with a relatively new method of smuggling large quantities of drugs through an international commercial supply chain. But the biggest surprise was not only where the cocaine was hidden, it was the quantity. Authorities ultimately seized 2,232 kilograms of cocaine, or more than 2.2 tons. To understand the scale of that number, we are not talking about someone trying to cross a border with a suitcase, or a small shipment that could be transported in a single car. We are talking about a network capable of bringing in wholesale quantities from Latin America to Europe, using commercial containers and a chain of people, companies, and transportation methods. But here the question that matters most appears. How did authorities actually reach this network in the first place? The story began long before the discovery of the shipment of hides. In September 2024, the Central Operations Unit of the Spanish Guardia Civil began an investigation after receiving information about a criminal group that was bringing cocaine into the province of Pontevedra in Spain from Portugal. At first, the investigation focused on a network that was bringing drugs into Spain. But as information continued to be gathered, a much bigger picture began to emerge. The cocaine was arriving in Portugal and then traveling overland towards Spain. There, the organization was using vehicles equipped with sophisticated concealment systems to transport the drugs more securely. It also had a number of properties in the Pontevedra area that were used to hide the drugs before they were distributed to different parts of Spain. This meant that the container was not the end of the journey. It was only one stage. The drugs arrived by sea. Then they entered Portugal. Then they moved towards Spain. Then they disappeared into different locations. Then the distribution stage began. Every stage of these operations required people, and every person represented a possibility of leaving a trace. That is why international cooperation became so important. The investigation was not being carried out by just one agency. The Portuguese Judicial Police, the Spanish Guardia Civil, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the authorities of the Dominican Republic, and Europol all participated, with Europol providing support and coordination. And this is where investigators began connecting information coming from more than one country. A shipment here, a suspect there, a company, a vehicle, an address, a communication, then another shipment. And over time, these separate details began to turn into one picture. A picture of an international network. But the network did not yet know that the circle of the investigation was beginning to close around it. In June and July 2025, the first phase of Operation Olympia took place. 7 suspects were arrested. But that was not the end. It was only the beginning of the bigger strike. Because investigators were still looking for the rest of the network. And more importantly, they wanted to know how much cocaine had actually entered Europe. And the answer would appear in the next phase. On September 3rd, 2025, authorities moved again. This time, the operation was directly connected to the network that had used cowhides as a way to conceal cocaine. During this phase, 12 suspects were arrested in Spain, in areas including Pontevedra, Barcelona, Ourense, Guadalajara, and Madrid. Adding them to the 7 people arrested during the first phase brought the total number to 19 people. But authorities were not stopping at the arrests. A total of 32 searches connected to the investigation were carried out. During these operations, authorities seized approximately 150,000 euros in cash, electronic devices, encrypted phones, satellite phones, and equipment related to counter-surveillance, in addition to luxury vehicles, documents, and other evidence. Authorities also reported seizing 4 firearms and 1 replica handgun, along with other evidence connected to the criminal activities. And at this point, it became clear that the case was not simply about transporting drugs. There was an entire structure behind it. People responsible for transportation, people monitoring the shipments, people providing locations to hide the drugs, and people handling the next stage after the drugs arrived. But one of the most important parts of the investigation was going back to the shipments themselves, because authorities had discovered that the network did not rely on only one method. According to Europol, investigators believed that the suspects sent dozens of containers carrying cocaine from the Dominican Republic to different locations in Europe, using the method of concealing the cocaine inside cowhides. And this is where discovering a single container becomes more important than it might appear. Because when you discover one shipment using this method, you do not only learn where the drugs are, you gain information about the method being used by the network. And that information can change the way authorities search for subsequent shipments. That is why dismantling the shipment was so important. Investigators did not find the cocaine simply by opening the container and looking inside. They had to completely dismantle the shipment to reach the hidden substance. This explains how the operation was able to involve such a massive quantity, even though the shipment traveled through a normal commercial route. The shipment itself contained legitimate goods, but the drugs were hidden in a way that made detection much more complicated. And here we see a very important point in this case. The smuggling operation did not rely only on hiding the cocaine, but on hiding it within a context that appeared legitimate. A commercial container, an importing company, a real product, a port, overland transportation, then distribution inside Spain. Each stage of this chain could appear separate if you looked at it individually, but when you put them together, you begin to see the entire operation. And this is exactly why international cooperation was so important. The Portuguese police had part of the information. The Guardia Civil had another part. The DEA had intelligence connected to the American side. The Dominican authorities had information from the point of origin. And Europol helped coordinate the exchange of information between the agencies. As a result, the investigation was no longer a collection of separate investigations. It became a single investigation stretching across borders. In Portugal, the customs authorities at the port of Leixões also participated in the investigation. This is important because the port was part of the route through which the shipments entered. According to the Portuguese judicial police, most of the seized drugs originated in South America and reached Europe by sea, inside containers, carrying shipments of cowhides imported through Portuguese companies. But ultimately, the strength of the operation was not in a single inspection. It was in the accumulation of information. From September 2024 until September 2025, the investigation continued to expand. Then came the arrests, then the searches, then the seizures, then the discovery of the concealment method. And finally, the number that summarized the scale of the entire operation appeared. 2,232 kilograms of cocaine. 19 people arrested. 32 searches. 150,000 euros in cash. And encrypted communication devices, satellite phones, luxury vehicles, documents, and other evidence. But what makes Operation Olympia different is that the network did not rely on some secret location far away from everyone's eyes. It tried to use one of the most ordinary processes in the modern world: international trade, containers moving between continents, goods entering ports, trucks traveling on roads, warehouses receiving products, and companies conducting business. In the middle of all of this, there was a massive quantity of cocaine. And this is why the case reveals an important aspect of the modern war on drug trafficking. Smugglers try to make the drugs look like part of something legitimate, and investigators try to discover the illegal element hidden inside this enormous legal system. In this particular operation, the method being used was sophisticated enough to bypass important detection methods at the port, which meant that the solution was not simply a quick inspection of the container. The solution was to completely dismantle the shipment. And when the dismantling was complete, the container was no longer just a container. It had become evidence. And the hides were no longer simply commercial goods. They had become part of one of the strangest methods of concealing cocaine uncovered by authorities in Europe during that period. And more importantly, the container was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the path to an entire network. A network that stretched between Latin America, Portugal, and Spain, and used maritime and overland trade to bring massive quantities of drugs into Europe. In the end, the operation that began with an investigation into a group bringing cocaine into Pontevedra ended with the exposure of a transnational criminal organization and the seizure of more than 2 tons of cocaine. But perhaps the biggest question left behind by the investigation is not how many kilograms were seized, but how many other shipments had the network sent before authorities reached this container? Because investigators believe that dozens of containers had been sent using the same method. This means that the container that exposed the operation was not necessarily the first, But it was one of the containers that allowed authorities to see the complete picture. And here, the journey ended for this shipment. The cocaine never reached its destination. The network lost a massive portion of its operation. 19 suspects were now in the hands of authorities, and the method that had seemed as though it would allow the drugs to disappear into ordinary commercial trade ultimately became one of the most important pieces of evidence revealing how the network operated. Because the most dangerous part of this case was not that more than 2 tons of cocaine were placed inside a container. It was that the container itself looked, from the outside, like any other container.